So if you are new here to Hill City, I'm just so grateful. I know there's family here for baptisms and everything. I'm just so grateful that you're here today because this Baptism Sundays was just so wonderful, and it's a celebration. And as I said earlier, it's just such a pivotal moment. Like you're part of a spiritual benchmark for people, which is something sacred that we get to be a part of together. We are in this series called Rizzdom, which is essentially like, what does it look like to live a compelling life? Like, what in the world does that mean, and how do we go about that? And we've been hovering all summer long in Proverbs chapter 3, and we're going to be back in there this morning for a couple of minutes, but then we're going to kind of look at some of the things that Jesus taught around the topic today. But recently, Lacey and I were talking about, she's not a Gen Xer. I am. Gen Xers. Yeah. And she's not a Gen Xer. She's the oldest millennial. She likes to remind me of that. And but we were talking about how funny it is, the difference in parenting right now compared to like when we were growing up. And it's wildly different. And listen, there are good things and bad things to every single era, okay? But I remember we were talking about how this meme that we were looking at about Gen Xers, and some of you guys will remember this, but it was just so true because this person said, hey, like Gen Xers like are tough because when we were kids, they rolled in this TV and said, hey guys, we're gonna watch the Challenger go up into space. And so like, because I remember this, like wheeling in the TV and we're all like huddled around the TV and it goes up and then blows up right in front of all of us. And the teachers were just like, all right, we're gonna go to recess and get your homework done. And like, that was it. Now there'd be like, everyone go to the cozy corner or you get 2 days off of school or whatever. But there was actually a commercial, Lacey reminded me of this one, like there was a commercial at one point that said, it's 10 o'clock, do you know where your kids are? I mean, think about that, right? Now all kids are tracked in every way, shape, and form. But so it's like wildly different, like the experience of kids growing up and what parenting actually was. And in the new form of parenting too, there's this, it's called lawn mowing parenting, where you're trying to just pave the way for your children so they don't have to have like any problems in their life, and you just clear it out and no worries and no fears and no anxieties, and you just make it so easy for them, and you're just worried about everything for them. And then we kind of like make sure, like, hey, I don't want you to go through anything. I don't want you to suffer. I don't want you to fail. And then you see all the data that's coming out that's nuts, right? We had the highest level of fear and anxiety we've ever had in kids. Depression is off the charts, and there's so many different reasons for that. But part of that is because of what has transpired culturally. I was reading how 25% of Gen Zers, all right, brought their parents to an interview for a job. All right? If you're a Gen Z, I'm not saying you did it. I'm just saying that, which is crazy. 13% say they have their parents fill out their job applications. And so it's not working, that level of thinking. It's not that all Gen Zs are this way. They're not. Like some Gen Zs are amazing. But that level of parenting and this way of thinking about it and the way that we have fear and worry about everything in life, it doesn't work. It doesn't cultivate grit. It doesn't cultivate resilience. It doesn't cultivate the things that are supposed to cultivate as human beings. And so we see all this. Like now we're in an election season, right? Which is great. And but here's like what we're gonna be a part of for the next few months is unending lies to try and scare us and make us fearful and make us worried. Like, who cares about fact-checking anything? Who cares? Like, just create a narrative that makes people fearful, and then you can get their vote. And it happens on both sides. And so it's like, this is what it's trying to get like inundated with all of these things. And it's just fascinating as you step back because you start seeing that we just live in a sea of people and a narrative culturally where everything is so dramatic. Everything is so fearful. Everything is so worrisome. Everything is so anxious-driven. Everything, it's like it's pumping into this. I was looking at some psychology stuff around this, and they have this thing called the Cartman drama triangle. And this is actually part of like what we're in right now. And you can kind of see this, I think. No? Well, there's something called, is it not working? Let's try this again. There's something called the Cartman drama triangle, where you begin to see something called, like, there's a persecutor, there's a rescuer, there's a victim. We'll figure it out for the next service because it's showing up on here. So, and then we have in this, it's like, oh, people are trying to go into these roles. And so this psychologist came up with it, and he was just talking through, like, what he sees in society. And this is all the way back in the 60s. And then what started to happen after that was they came up with something different later on, which was like, oh, we need something to figure out, like, how do we get people out of this mindset where they either just always feel persecuted, or they always feel like they need to rescue someone, or they always feel like the victim. And they had something else that came up, and it's called the empowerment dynamic. And this other psychiatrist, like, comes up with this idea of, like, oh, you got to change, like, the persecutor into the challenger, and then the victim into the creator, and then the rescuer into the coach. And they're trying to figure all these different things out. And so I'm reading about all this stuff and taking in all the other data that's coming through with what's happening in culture. And I'm just laughing at some of it, because some of their conclusions, I'm like, the Bible talked about all of this stuff a couple of thousand years ago. I mean, Jesus taught about this, about how to handle worry and anxiety, like, way better than what you guys are talking about through all of this, trying to, like, figure out how to manipulate people's minds and do these different things. And it's like, man, we already have a basis of how to build all of this stuff off of. And so even within the context of how we see, like, why is it so important to learn and read the Bible and study the Bible? Well, part of it is because some of the advice that you begin to see that's out there is quote unquote wisdom that's already out there. It's like, man, people have been talking about it for a very long time. It's just a question of whether or not you choose to believe it and what we build our lives on. But fear and worry starts coming up. And, even recently, we were in a conversation with some friends, and we were talking about whether or not in our lifetime will we see the end of the American empire, and because that's what you do with friends. And and I don't know whether or not we will or whatever, but what we were talking about was, like, what would happen, and, like, what do we do, and all this, just kind of going through scenarios. And when we were all talking about it, it was, like, interesting, though, because when we kind of got through some of the ups and downs and whatever, because historically it's going to happen at some point. And so we started, like, saying this, like, but if we just, like, kind of stick to what we know and stay centered on the right things, like, it's all going to be fine. It's all going to be fine. It's all good, because we know about God, and we know what this should mean for our lives, and it changes our entire perspective around the world around us, because it is compelling when you think about a compelling life. It is compelling when you see someone see the world as you should. It's compelling when you're with someone who goes through something really difficult, and they have some view on their circumstances that you're just like, whoa, that is a very different way to see this and understand it. And, like, it's so different. And so I want to talk about that today, because in Proverbs chapter 3, it starts getting into this idea about fear and worry. And some of you guys, I'm not going to ask you to raise your hands about if you've dealt with fear and worry. You'll get worried that I just would ask you to raise your hands. And so I don't, but, like, do you have, like, a crippling, like, element of fear and worry, or maybe you've had anxiety, or maybe you've had depression, or maybe, like, some of these things, and trying to figure out, like, okay, what do I do with all this stuff? How do I center myself in the right way, and how do I begin to approach this? And so in Proverbs chapter 3, it says this, and I know you guys can't see it on the screen, which is unfortunate, but it says this, my son, and starting in verse 21, my son, do not love wisdom and understanding out of your sight. Preserve judgment and discretion. They will be life for you, an ornament to grace around your neck. Then you will go on your way in safety, and your foot will not stumble. When you lie down, you will not be afraid. When you lie down, your sleep will be sweet. Have no fear of the sudden disaster or of the ruin that overtakes the wicked. For the Lord will be at your side. Everyone say, at your side. And will keep your foot from being snared. It's this incredible passage that the writer here is trying to inject wisdom into us. And he's like, listen, you've got to remember this. The ebbs and flows of life are going to happen, and you're going to see chaos around you at times. But if you can just preserve the wisdom and understanding that he's trying to give, that we're supposed to give and receive from God, if you can do it, you can live a compelling life in the midst of this. You can see the world how we should see it. And I get it. Like sometimes when you hear things like that, you might be thinking like, yeah, but wags. When they wrote this, like so many centuries ago, when they wrote this, they didn't know what we were going through. Like, it's so hard now. We've got influencers telling us what to do. We got robots that can write things for us and give us answers to anything. Like, we've got all this violence. We've got political chaos. We've got like all this. We have access to anything just at the tip of our fingers. Like, it's so difficult now. So difficult. If we could have like a video into like, if we had a time machine and we could say that to those people back then, they would double over laughing in our faces. Because what they were going through compared to what we are going through is nothing. Like, they were going through so much more. It was so much more chaotic. It was so much more evil. There was so much more violence going on. Like, it was crazy. Yet, this was the wisdom that was coming out. Yet, this was the writings that were being put into people. I'm going to read you what Jesus said, too, because when Jesus wrote, it was actually just as bad, and if not worse. Then it got really bad for Jesus soon after that. But the ancient writer and the listener would think, whoa, what we were going through is way more difficult than what you guys are going through. Yet why are you so worried? Why are you so fearful? Why are you so anxious? Why are you pulling this in all the time? Like, what is it that is transpiring that's making it so difficult for you to live with hope, to live with, to remember, as I said, what did I have you guys repeat in that passage? That God is at our what? Side. We choose whether or not we want to remember that. That God is at our side. No matter what we are going through, no matter what we're working through. See, a compelling life doesn't avoid tough circumstances. A compelling life sees them for what they are. So how many of you guys have been through something difficult? Just leave your hand up. I mean, look around this room. Every single person in this room has been through something very difficult in their life. But you're still here. You are. I'm not saying there weren't consequences. I'm not saying it wasn't difficult. I'm not saying it didn't hurt you in some kind of way. But you are still here. And can you imagine, knowing what you know now, how differently you would have handled that situation before? To be able to see that God can come through, that God is at my side, to remember and to choose that way of thinking, to allow yourself to be grounded in that. You're going to say, oh, it's been difficult. It's been difficult. But man, maybe there's a bigger picture here. Maybe if we believe, as we were singing, that God doesn't lie to us and that he's a keeper of his word, that maybe it's true that God's going to work everything out for his good. And maybe we have a choice to engage that and to think about it. And it's like, well, what if that becomes a centering point? What if that becomes how I see the world around me? What if that is, and I get it, like it gets difficult. We've gone through a ton of very difficult things as a family. And it's like, there are a lot of hard things, and you are too, and no one's is worse than anyone else's. It's like kind of just how we're all going through it. And so you might be staring something down right now that is so difficult for you, but what if you could see it the way God sees it? What if you could see it in the ability to have like wisdom and discernment and understanding through all of it? Jesus talks a lot about worry and anxiety and fear. And you guys, if you've been to church for any length of time, you know, you've heard someone say like, oh, one of the most often written commands in the Bible is fear not. And it's true. But Jesus talked a lot about fear and anxiety. And in Luke chapter 12, he actually says this. He says, he gathers his disciples around. And some of you guys remember this part of the story. But he gathers his disciples around. And he says this. He says, therefore, I tell you, do not worry about your life, what you will eat, or about your body, or what you will wear. How many of you guys do that just 100% of the time? Like, man, I don't worry about a thing. I don't worry about like what I'm going to eat. I don't worry about, like, I go in my closet. I was like, I don't even care. I just pull whatever I want out. It doesn't matter, right? Like, I don't, like, it's like, no, we all have these moments where we worry. We all have these concerns, and Jesus is like, hey, here's what I want you to do. He later goes on right after that. He goes, here's what I want you to do. You want to be one of the most helpful things you could do to stop with your worry and your fear and your anxiety. I want you to go look at the lilies and look at the birds. Why in the world would he say that? He's like, I want you to go out and just look at it. To go and be a part of that. Now we would say things like, I want you to go have and contemplate the world around you. I want you to go have times of meditation. I want you to go have this concept of grounding yourself kind of in nature, shoes off, everything, grounding yourself. But Jesus was already talking about all this stuff a long time ago. He's like, here's what I want you to do. I want you to go out and I want you to look at the birds. And so this week when I had prepped this, I was just standing outside at one point, and I was just like, all right, I'm just going to look at the birds and see what happens. And so I was just looking at the birds. And at first, I was like, I don't want to do this, and I get it. But then if you just kind of sit for a little bit longer and you enter the moment, and you just kind of think about a bird's life. I don't know if you've ever done this, but you just think about a bird's life. And you're like, it's crazy you can stay alive. It's crazy God lets you fly. That's cool. It's crazy that God provides for the birds. And I'm like, well, dang, if he provides for the birds, then he loves me way more than a bird. Right? I know some of y'all are animal people, but it is true. He loves humans more than birds. So then I was like, all right, I'm going to do the flower thing. And so I'm looking at flowers, and there's this nice little, near a building I was at, had nice flowers out there. And I was just like, it is crazy how this happens. And how God has provided and created and how this just all works. I'm like, it's wild with these flowers. They're wonderful. And even on our own yard, we've got some in our flower bed and everything. And I was just, and sometimes Ruby will say to Ruby, oh, the hibiscus, it's come out. And then we'll tell her, oh, it's sleeping right now, whatever. And it's but it is crazy when you think about it, how it works. How God has provided and created and done this thing. I'm like, he loves me way more than a flower. But how often do I forget that? How often do I let the things of this earth and in my life overtake that? What Jesus often does is when he's talking, he's like, hey, part of the reason that you get so fearful and part of the reason that we get so anxious and part of the reason that we get so worried is we live with a scarcity mindset, that there'll never be enough. And one of the anecdotes that Jesus will always talk about is hey, you live a life of generosity and all that you are, you'll start seeing my goodness and my provision for you. But when you're stingy and you're greedy and you live a scarcity mindset, of course you'll never see God providing because you're trying to do your whole life on your own. And of course that's going to lead to more worry. And of course it's going to lead to more anxiety. Of course it's going to lead to more fear because we think it's all on us. But Jesus is like, no, hold on a second. There's more here to the story. Jesus is also interesting because how many guys get a little, this is okay, this is a safe spot. You get a little stressed out about just security in life. Anyone? Okay. Jesus likes to call that into question a lot. It's why do you have to be so secure? Why can't you trust and have security in me? And I get it, y'all, we're all on the same page. Every hand went up. So we're all on the same page. We all get to those spaces, but Jesus is just trust me. Trust this wisdom I'm giving you. Trust this understanding. Trust this discernment. Just trust me on this. Trust what I've said and what I'm about to do. And Jesus was doing this all the time. I mean, even think about, he has one parable where he talks about you're trying to set things up and be so secure and everything, but you can store everything away and you're just one dumb generation from all of that being gone. So some of y'all are doing a wonderful, and this is great. I'm not ridiculing this. This is a good thing. Some of y'all are doing a really good job of saving for your future and what will happen, and you're trying to set your kids up really well, and that's awesome. It really is. And I'm not. But if your kid's a fool, it doesn't end up mattering. And you spent your whole life trying to do something, right? So it's man, even security feels so it's so gray, it's so tense. I'm not sure how this all works. And Jesus is calling that into question. Where's your real security? What is it? Because our life can change like that. So what's our centering point to all of us? Even for Jesus, it was fascinating because he was essentially stressing whatever kind of shapes your life is what you'll have concerns about or worry about. And so if you can kind of pause and think about, like, what do I really worry about all the time? Or what gets me, like, so concerned? What makes me fearful? And it's like, oh, that's probably has too much of a grip on your life as a centering point for who you are. Because when we allow Jesus to speak into those things, all of a sudden, the rough edges start getting rounded, and a cleaner picture starts happening of like, oh, no, I can actually see this the way it should be. Now, does this mean you won't have a worry? I'm not saying that. Jesus actually had some worries, and he had some concerns. He had a lot of concern about what sin was doing to people. It actually brought him to tears. He had concerns and worries for his disciples and for the future of the church, and he actually prayed around that. He was concerned for people that were in different spots, with people that were sick or kind of living a certain life. He had concerns and worries for the religious people and the religious structure at the time. Like he was concerned about a lot of different things. So it doesn't mean that all of a sudden, if you do this the exact right way, that here's what you'll do. You'll be like some hippie, just flying everywhere with no worries in the world. I actually shouldn't say it about hippies. Sorry, but like you think like, oh, if I could just do this, I'll be worry-free. And it's like, no, I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is like, we are going to have worries, we are going to have concerns, and things are going to creep up, but it's like, what do we do with those things? What is the context in the story we start telling ourselves? What is the narrative we're allowing to be written? What's the centering point that we're basing everything off of? Jesus, at one point in time, if you're not familiar with the Bible at all, I'm giving away the ending. Jesus dies, and then he comes back, so it's a really cool story. But Jesus, at one point in time, he's facing death. He's facing death, and he goes to the Garden of Gethsemane, and he begins to pray. And this is in Matthew 26. And Jesus is in this moment, he gathers his friends, and he's like, hey, we got to go pray. And we're going to see, I want you to see what Jesus does to handle his worries and his fears. And he says, hey, we're going to go, and we're going to go pray together. So he gathers some of his friends, and he comes up, and then he says this to them. He goes, my soul is overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death. How many of you guys have ever felt that way? Like the depth of your soul has just been like so overwhelmed with fear or anxiety, or he's like, and this is Jesus talking. He looks at his friends, he says, stay here and keep watch with me. Going a little bit further, he fell in his face to the ground and prayed, my Father, if it is possible, may this cup be taken from me. Like this will be his death. But he's like, man, if you could just take this from me. He's feeling the weight of everything he's going through. But then he says this, but yet not as I will, but as you will. So we start seeing like, all right, so Jesus, he gathers his friends, and then he has this rhythm in his life, and he bows down to worship and to pray, and in anguish, he's laying it down before the Lord. And we recently were hanging out with Lacey's aunt and uncle who are missionaries in Africa, and her aunt was just telling a story about how she prays, and I just thought it was like really cool. She goes, what I do is when I pray, I keep my hands down, and I say, I am surrendering whatever she's praying for. She keeps her hands down and keeps praying until she feels like whatever she's praying for and she needs to surrender, she keeps her hands down. And until she feels like I've surrendered it wholeheartedly, she will turn her hands up to receive. And she was saying that, I was like, oh, what a beautiful picture of prayer. And this is how, so when she said that, and I was like reading through my notes again, I'm like, I just pictured Jesus being like, if you could take this cup from me, and this worry from me, and this concern from me, and this fear from me that's here, I know the plan, I know that, but I'm still gripped by some of it, but I'm surrendering it to you, God. And when he had fully surrendered, I just picture him just being like, yep, not my will, but your will be done. It flips it. It changes it. It reframes the whole story. So he goes back to his friends and he says, hey, watch and pray so that you will not fall into temptation. He's saying to his friends, like, listen, in these moments of fear and worry and what you know is about to happen, like anyone can fall. Anyone can fall. He says the spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak. And so he went away a second time and he prayed. And he says, my Father, if it's not possible for this cup to be taken away unless I drink it, he says it again, may your will be done. He goes back to his friends, the disciples, and he says to them, are you still sleeping and resting? They couldn't stay awake as friends. He's like, you're supposed to be with me on this. He goes, look, the hour has come, the Son of Man, meaning himself, is delivered into the hands of his sinners. And he says this, now his attitude's changed. Rise, let's go. Here comes my betrayer. And here's what he's saying. Let's go meet the moment. Rise up, let's go meet the moment. When we're riddled with fear and worried and anxiety, we cower away. We isolate. But it's like, no, when we get to this point where we're willing to surrender, and then we can receive and say like, no, your will be done, God. I can rise up and meet the moment. And I love this point because it's so good. So Jesus then sees Judas coming at him, and this is how I just picture it. You can't really tell the tone, but I just picture him just being like seeing Judas and being like, says, do what you came here for, friend. And I just, with confidence and with understanding of what was about to happen, Jesus is like, I'm going to stand in the midst of what was worrying me and what was making me concerned and everything. And I know the weight of all of this, but I can rise to the moment because I understand it's God's will that needs to be done, not mine. And it changed everything. Here are some reasons that you might be stuck and that you need to recenter. And I'm just going to run through them quickly and just think about this. Maybe it's circumstances that are dictating your perspective. Maybe you haven't asked for any help. Maybe you're stuck because you're too self-absorbed. Maybe you're stuck because you've demeaned the power of God. So often, I've been around people who have like stopped believing in the healing power of God or the power in the name of Jesus. And maybe that's part of the reason why you're stuck and fearful and anxious and worried. Maybe you're greedy, you have a scarcity mindset. Maybe there's a lack of spiritual growth. Maybe you're ignoring areas of disobedience. Maybe you've isolated yourself. Maybe you're driven by ambition, or maybe you're concerned with keeping up with everyone all the time. Maybe you're just so consumed by this mythical future that might or might not happen. Maybe you have an unhealthy fixation on the approval of others. Maybe there's a stronghold in your life. The Bible talks a lot about strongholds. Something that's got such a grip on you, or a person, or a thing, or an addiction. Something that's got such a grip on you that you don't know what to do with it. Maybe you have misinformed theology. Maybe you're escapism. You're trying to find all these different ways to escape. Maybe you're numbing your emotions. Maybe it's something passed down from generations before you that needs to get interrupted. Maybe it's from personal trauma. Or maybe it's a lack of trust in God. I know there's a lot, and some of you guys are trying to write them down. I did have a list. You could take a picture. But maybe it's one of those things. Is this a cure-all to everything? No, I'm not saying that. But here's what I do know, that unchecked worry and anxiety will make us unresponsive to the work of the Spirit. So figuring out what that is and figuring out there are answers to your fears, there are answers to your worries, there are answers to your anxieties. There are. I'm not, and listen, don't mishear me either. I'm not saying you don't need to be on medicine. I'm not saying, you don't need to go see a counselor. I'm not saying that we are, those could be very good things. But we also need to be doing all of this other stuff to set us in the right direction and an understanding. So what would wisdom say to worry and anxiety? Here are 4 quick things. And then we're going to watch a video. Be honest about your purpose. If you're someone who struggles with fear and anxiety and worry, which everyone's hand went up to some degree, I think we have to really be honest about what our purpose is, like what our focus is, what is like shaping our identity. That tells us a lot. You need to establish spiritual rhythms. We see this in Jesus. What does he do? He goes out to pray. That was his rhythm. When fear and anxiety, worry was coming, he goes to pray. That was his rhythm. He had spiritual rhythms in his life. We all need spiritual rhythms in our lives. The spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak. How does that happen? Because we lack spiritual rhythms. The third thing is we need to eliminate contributors. So what are the things that are contributing to your worry and your anxiety and your fears? Like, what are those things? If you're looking at the world around us right now, let's just say, or are you looking at our country right now, and you are gripped by fear about what's happening in our country, I would say this, then turn off the freaking TV and stop reading the news and spend all of that time in prayer and reading scripture and with people who are willing to encourage and challenge one another to just keep living out the teachings and the love of Christ. Jesus, and what he was doing is eliminating contributors. He's like, I'm going to gather my friends, my close friends. This is another good one. To gather your close friends. And it's like these people, I want them to pray with me. And we're going to go get away from all this stuff. The last one is to seek wise counsel. Seek wise counsel. Who are you going to that helps you with your fear and your anxiety and your worries? Like, who is it? Who's contributing to all of this? Will all these things make you bulletproof? And the answer is no. But what it will do is when those things keep creeping up, it centers you. So I'm just going to run through them again. Be honest about your purpose, establish spiritual rhythms, eliminate contributors, and then seek wise counsel. And that's what wisdom says to worry, fear, and anxiety. It's like, all right, when they start to creep up, am I doing these things in my life? I want you to see a video about a couple in our church here. Their story is just amazing. And I want you to see how they responded to something that was incredibly difficult in their lives. And I know that they did these 4 things in their lives. And wait to hear the message of what came out of it. So take a look.
Within the last 5 years, we've had 7 miscarriages, one almost threatening my own life. The first miscarriage and the first and second losses that we experienced, I was rattled, and there really wasn't a lot of hope in having such a deep darkness that I was able to personally and together, we were able to come to God with our honest feelings. Like, I remember just saying, I am so mad at you, God. Like, I am so angry. And I would go numb, I would feel very numb, and then I would feel anger, and I would just have all these feelings. And with the first couple losses, those were what prevailed for a good chunk of time. Whereas as I've now had 7 of those types of losses, I walk through it so differently because I'm familiar with it. And as much as the losses aren't a gift, the familiarity of who God is through that has been such a gift.
And I feel like with every milestone or every situation we faced, like, we've really, like, God has shown up in our marriage and he's brought us closer together.
We were barely engaged with Hill City when we had our first pregnancy, and it was within just a couple months that our world was turned upside down. And so we had relationships, we knew people, we had just started serving, and then to see the type of love and outpour that Hill City and people that we maybe really just met show up for us was just we really felt like we were seeing Jesus on display.
We've been approved to be foster parents for a couple years and never got a call. And I think it's just another glimpse of, like, God's timing is just always perfect. And so when we were ready, like, he knew that, and he sent our foster son to us. So we've been foster parents now since January.
Our oldest son is 5, and he was also adopted. And it was a very different journey. We did a private adoption with him, but our family got to grow outside of Hill City, but with his biological family, and they're truly our extended family.
And I think now that we have a child in our home, like, it's really God's way of showing us, like, your job right now is to care for this child and love this child and do what you can for this child, and I'll take care of the rest of it. I think loss has a way of making you focus on, like, the here and the now, and for me it was so much about, because I hadn't been through a lot of trauma in my life, prior to us being married, there was a lot of, I think, stuff in my own life that I had sort of ignored or didn't deal with because I was so focused on how do we get through this miscarriage or how do we get through this loss. My last discipleship from a couple of months ago, someone said to me, like, very plainly, I feel like there's something in you that is not coming out for some reason. Like, you haven't tapped into your full potential. And that sort of hit me like right between the eyes. And so I really started to unpack that and figure out like what that was about. And, I found out I had a lot of anxiety and a lot of anxiousness that I had not dealt with. And so he's definitely moved a lot in that way in the last couple of months, and freed me from a lot of those anxious thoughts and anxieties that I had.
Just truly understanding that we aren't in control. I think in this process for me, specifically in our adulthood with the miscarriages and now exploring foster care and all of that with adoption, I'm someone, my personality is a little bit of a control freak. And so I think it's been really cool to see how God has used that to complete his plan because of my control freakness. We have gotten a lot done, and like anytime we get paperwork from a social service, it's done that day. Like I am just like on it. But he also has humbled me because there's a lot that I can't do. And foster care and adoption and pregnancy losses has humbled me so much to the point of just complete gratitude, because now I don't have to carry it, and that's just a wonderful thing.
Good story. It's compelling. That's a compelling way to see life, a compelling way to see their circumstances, a compelling, and knowing those guys, like what we're talking about today is what they've done. It's not easy. It's not smooth, but it can happen. As the band comes back up, I have 3 questions for you guys to just listen to and kind of take in. But I also want you to know that like through all of our fears, anxieties, and worries, like we have a choice in how we want to respond. Do we want to remember that he's a keeper of his word? Do we want to remember in the power of the name of Jesus? And so here are 3 questions. The first one is this: do you trust the answers to your fears, worry, and anxiety? Like even for Janelle and Will, like there were answers in the midst of their fear and worry and anxiety. And they eventually trusted them. Or how about this? Is your first response to believe what Jesus taught or fight against it? So when he's saying, like, hey, go look at the birds and look at the lilies. Is our first, do we want to like believe that to be true, or do we want to fight against it? Or how about this? In the darker moments of your life, what's your default position? Is it to go in prayer and find wise counsel and have your spiritual rhythms? Is that the default position, or is there another way we go about this? We're going to sing just a beautiful song that is just unbelievably powerful. It's called I Speak Jesus, and Lacey and I were reflecting together around this song, but also like in thinking about how we were both raised. And her mom and dad and my mom and dad, like growing up, they both would say things like this: hey, if you don't know what to pray, like just speak the name of Jesus. If it feels like too much, just speak the name of Jesus. If you can't find the right words, speak the name of Jesus. If you feel like you're overwhelmed, like speak the name of Jesus. And so this song resonates with that. And so I don't know everyone's story in this room, but I do know that there are a lot of circumstances here represented that you don't know what else to do or how to go about this. Maybe it's your marriage, or maybe it's your kids, or maybe it's a friend, or maybe it's for you personally, or it's at work, or it's health, or whatever the circumstance is. What this song tells us is just, I want to speak Jesus into this. So if you guys would bow your heads for just a second, I want you to just get your hearts in the right spot to be able to sing and take in these words.